chapter 48, verse 23. And the laws of Allah that have gone before, you will not find in His laws. You will not find a change in His laws. Chapter 45, verses 12 to 13. Allah is He who made subservient to you the sea and the ships that may glide therein by His command, and that you may seek of His grace, and that you may give thanks. And He has made subservient to you whatever is in the heavens and whatever is in the earth, all from Himself. Surely there are signs in this for a people who reflect. In chapter 14, verses 32 to 34. Allah is He who created the heavens and the earth and sent down water from the clouds and then brought forth with it fruits as a sustenance for you. And He has made the ships subservient to you to run their course in the sea by His command. And He has made the rivers subservient to you. And He has made subservient to you the sun and the moon pursuing their course. And He has made subservient to you the night and the day. And He gives you of all you ask of Him. And if you count Allah's favors, you will not be able to number them. Surely man is very ungrateful and unjust. I recited these verses last time, and there was a complaint that people said, we don't know what you're talking about. So I thought, perhaps I got so involved in giving examples from physics that maybe I got distracted. So let's have another go, without any examples from physics. These verses say that God's laws, Allah's laws, are universal and they apply everywhere. Now, usually we only see the physical laws. Sun going down, sun coming up, crops, vegetables coming up. But there are other types of laws that Allah has created, and these are spiritual laws. So we have two types of laws, physical and spiritual, and this verse that I recited tells us that all of them are universal. So wherever you go, the law that Allah has created is the same. But then there is a problem. Because what happens is that when you are carrying out research, you find a law, how does this work? That research is impacted by the environment and the circumstances in which it's carried out. Last time, for example, I said that the weight of a body is approximately 10 times its mass, and mass is the amount of stuff in something, what makes it. But that is only true on this earth. Because what we have discovered is affected by the environment and the circumstances. The main thing that's impacting upon this law is the size of the earth itself. If we want the true law about how much weight there is, what something weighs, then we need to be free from Earth's influence. We know on the moon Something's weight is not 10 times its mass, what it's made up of. This is why you see astronauts bob about on the moon. They have to leap from one place to another. In other places, whatever body it is, whether it's human or animate or inanimate, its weight will depend on the circumstances there. So the general law can be said to be that the weight of a body is equal to how hard a planet is pulling that body multiplied by what makes it. So that would be the general law. But you would get that if you go somewhere which is free of the influence of any particular planet or moon. Now the same thing applies to spiritual laws. What an individual discovers by way of a spiritual law is impacted, is governed by his soul, his education, his ego, his intellect, his environment, all these things. Just like the physical laws we talked about are affected by the environment in which you carry out the experiments to work them out. But then there are universal spiritual laws, and they are discovered by people who are called prophets. And to discover those laws, just like to discover physical laws, you had to cut yourself off from the environment in which you were and go and carry out the experiment which was free of external influences. In the same way, where spiritual laws are concerned, you have to do exactly the same thing. You have to cut yourself off from your environment, from your external influences. Because if you don't, then what you would discover may be a particular local implementation of a spiritual law. And just like we get into a rocket and we go into space to get to a point where Earth's gravity and its atmosphere and its climate does not affect the experiment that we are trying to do and the law that we're trying to find. In the same way, you need to cut yourself off from your environment. And how do we do that? We do that by our 5 daily prayers, the salat that we do. That is its whole objective. You start off by cutting yourself off from your work, from your business, from whatever it is that you're doing. And then you go and you wash and prepare yourself so that the impact, the effect of the environment that you were in, that is reduced. And you try and reduce that as far as possible. You're trying to calm yourself down. You're trying to move yourself away from the temptations of this world.
Oh, because I sit on the bottom.
And the same thing applies during Ramadan.
Because I sat on the bottom.
What you're doing is you're cutting yourself off from even your physical needs.
Yeah.
And you're trying to purify your body and you're trying to purify your soul. So these are the examples of how to find universal spiritual laws. You will cut yourself off from physical things. Zakat is also another example. That what you're doing is simply you are simply giving away a part of what you have earned. Why? To show that this is not what you love. This is not what your concern is. It's an exercise in giving away, in cutting yourself off from the temptations and possessions of this world. So all of Islamic devotions and religious practices, Salat, Ramadan, Zakat, Hajj, they all allow us, they all require us, they all make us practice cutting ourselves off from our physical environment so that we can, through these exercises, we can try and determine what universal spiritual laws are. And another point that I made last time was this, that when we look at physical laws, we look at things which we regard as calamities. Which are calamities? They're calamities in the sense that property is destroyed, and people die and people suffer, as we have seen recently in Philippines. But those physical calamities also are beneficial. Why are they beneficial? For example, a river floods. When you have a floodplain and a river floods it, although it causes destruction, it also fertilizes the land and it also irrigates the land. And we have seen that where people have built dams to try and stop the rivers from flooding, although flooding has stopped, this has caused other problems as far as land is concerned. Land has become barren, it is not so fertile, and people then use chemical fertilizer to bring that fertility back. Because otherwise, of course, the production you have of crops and so on in that land, that will go down, and what that will mean is that people will be without food. Another example is volcanoes exploding. When volcanoes explode, they cause a lot of destruction. But then, if we didn't have that molten lava, if we didn't have the electric currents in that molten lava, and we didn't have those currents moving and causing a magnetic field, then the sun's solar winds will hit the earth, they will destroy its atmosphere, and eventually they will destroy its soil as well. So you can see that whereas on the one hand, we can say that this volcano exploded and it caused all this destruction, why couldn't Earth have a solid interior? But this molten interior is required, is necessary for this universe, certainly for this Earth to operate. If it didn't exist, Earth would be destroyed. And we know this. How do we know this? If we look at Mars, Mars has more or less a solid interior. It doesn't have currents that are flowing through it and causing a magnetic field. So the result is that the solar winds directly hit Mars and they destroyed its atmosphere. It is thought that hundreds of millions of years ago, Mars did have an atmosphere, but it's been stripped away. You can tell by the surface of Mars that perhaps there water flowed there and other things that we observe on Earth happened there. But as solar winds attacked the atmosphere and stripped it away, Mars died. And it will remain a dead planet. Earth won't, as long as it has molten interior that generates this magnetic field that protects it from the solar winds and their damaging effects. Now, the same thing, exactly the same thing happens in spiritual life. That we have these calamities, but they actually help to preserve our greater values. When someone dies, certainly when someone we love dies, that is an opportunity for us to spiritually elevate ourselves, to look at their lives and see whether they achieved anything, and try and emulate that in our lives, to see whether they didn't achieve anything, and try and avoid the things that they did. Maybe they spent all their time doing business or working, amassing great houses, but spiritually they were left poor and weak. So someone's death, although it's a calamity for the family, but the family itself and all those around them, they can learn this lesson and spiritually improve themselves. There is an example of a person who was grieving in Qadian, and Hazrat Masih Maud asked, why is this man grieving? And he was told that some close friend of his whom he loved very much has died. Upon this, Hazrat Sahib just said one sentence, which encapsulates what our attitude to this life and physical things should be. He said, as he knew he was going to lose him one day, why did he love him so? And this was the Holy Prophet's attitude. As we've seen in hadith after hadith, what did the Holy Prophet say? He said, God gave me a choice between this world and the hereafter, and I chose the hereafter. He said, my example in this world is like that of a traveler who is on a long journey and having got tired, takes a short rest in the shade before he carries on towards his objective. So these are the people, these prophets are the people who discovered these universal spiritual laws. And that is why it is said that if you want to spiritually elevate yourself, then what you should do is to walk in their footsteps. If you're carrying out a physical experiment, and you look at what your professor did, you look at what some great scientist did, how he conducted that experiment, and you try and copy them. In the same way, it is said that if you want to elevate yourself spiritually, then walk in the footsteps of the prophets, because they have discovered these universal laws. And all of these things, they teach us a lesson, which is that physical things will perish. The only thing that remains is spiritual gains and spiritual elevation. If you look at the Holy Prophet Muhammad from a worldly perspective, he didn't have much money, he didn't have many possessions. He was a poor man. But look at his spiritual achievements. Look at Hazrat Abu Bakr. Look at Hazrat Umar. And other companions, Radiyallahu Ta'ala anhum, of the Holy Prophet. Those who were rich set an example of sacrificing their riches for the cause of Islam. Those who were poor They also set an example of sacrificing whatever little they had for the sake of Islam. And their attitude was, Allah's name is enough for us. The only physical thing that we need is the name Allah. We don't need anything else. So in these verses, when God says that everything is made subservient to you, God gives examples from the physical world of the sun and the moon to show that man has the ability to learn how they operate and to use them for his own benefit. Of course, sun and the moon were the greatest things that people knew and could understand. And in the same way, Allah says that man has the ability to spiritually rise and learn how it is that sun benefits us physically, and then learn how that sun, called the Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, benefits us spiritually. To learn how the moon, which reflects the sun's light, as the Holy Quran says, benefits us physically, and to learn how Hazrat Masih Maud, who also reflected the sun's light to us, how they can benefit us spiritually. I hope now that I have avoided any references. Well, there was a little reference to physics and so on. What I was trying to say about the message of these verses of the Holy Quran that I recited earlier is more meaningful.